Hello everyone, greetings, namaste, and welcome to our today's webinar, which is based on Swami Kriyananda ji's book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. And today's topic is self-confidence. With me joining is Brahmachari Jemal, and I will start us with the reading for the topic, followed by we'll do a short affirmation, and then Brahmachari Jemal will share with us. So let's begin with the reading. Self-confidence. Swami Kriyananda ji says, self-confidence, as it is normally understood, recalls to mind images of army generals and cowboy heroes, people, in short, who know their blacks from their whites. But life's alternatives are usually more complex. Self confidence on the spiritual path is of another order altogether. It means confidence in the inner self, not in the ego. It means living from within, living by truth rather than by opinions. It means living by what God wants, not by what man wants. Thus, it means living by faith in the sure knowledge that although man is fallible, God is infallible. Now let's affirm together, first out loud, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self and not in the opinions of others lies true victory. Now, in a normal voice, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self and not in the opinions of others lies true victory. In a whispering voice, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self and not in the opinions of others lies true victory. Mentally, taking it to the subconscious mind, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self and not in the opinions of others lies true victory. Now, taking it to the superconscious mind, gazing at the point between the eyebrows, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self and not in the opinions of others lies true victory. Mentally praying, what matter if people blame me? Of what importance is their applause? I live to please Thee, Lord, confident that when Thou art with me, I am protected, though it be from an enemy horde. With that, I would like to pass on to Brahmachari Jamal.
Thank you, Vineet. What comes to mind is a little saying, praise and blame, all the same. And that's a nice attitude to have on the spiritual path, because people will blame us for things. Maybe it actually is our fault, maybe it's not. It's an interesting spiritual discipline to let people blame you and not defend yourself, even if the fault isn't yours, as long as someone else won't get hurt in that, or very deep principles, other principles like the one I just mentioned with people getting hurt aren't at stake. But if it's some little thing and you just get to take the blame, what's it really matter? It's a wonderful spiritual discipline, because the ego likes to jump up and say, whoa, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't do that. And if we're all really one and it's all God's show, what does it matter? And of course, on the flip side, the ego likes to say, whoa, 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 wait, I did that when it was a good thing. And again, if others take the credit for something that maybe you were responsible for, again, if it really doesn't matter, if deeper principles of something else aren't at stake, then let someone else take the credit. Again, I like to think that what was important, that the project got done, not who did it or whose idea that it was, that there was something simply that God needed to accomplish. And if it was accomplished through me, all right. If it was accomplished through someone else, all right. But that it simply got accomplished, and that we can all take joy in that. You know, another thing when it comes to, I almost said the word demolishing the ego, but I don't really like that. It doesn't work. To offering up the ego and to merging the ego into God's joy. This is really the way that we can do that, is by having that attitude of offering up the ego and getting rid of it. But there's many different things that we can do and that we should do to pay attention and try to see, do we feel that God is the doer, or do we feel that our little self is the doer? Swamiji's book, Sadhu Beware, contains a number of little ways that we can become an ego detective. And, and it's a wonderful book to pick up just in general, obviously, but then to take one of those little ego detective points that he makes there and use it for a little while and see. It's a wonderful way to start to get rid of this difficult thing we have to contend with, called the ego. I will get more into how we can get rid of the ego and why we should get rid of the ego. But before I do that, you know, the spiritual path is tricky, is interesting, that there's such a thing actually as a healthy ego. For us just to always go around and say, I can't do it, I can't do it, oh, no, no, not me, no, no, and thinking that we're going to be humble and get rid of the ego in that way, it doesn't work. That if we're sprinkling dust on our head in the name of being humble, we're probably concentrating on the dust in our head and thinking how humble I am, which there goes the whole point of that game. So even to say, oh, no, 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 I can't do it, I can't do it, that also the ego's there. At the end, we just want to feel that we're not the doer at all, but which is completely neutral. And it won't even get involved of I can do it or I can't do it. It's just something simply needs to be done, and we almost watch as God does it through us, if that's what's going to happen. If it's not going to be through us, well then, all right. Swami Kriyananda would say that Swami Kriyananda is simply an event for which I am responsible for. The first time I heard him say that, I didn't, what? You are an event that you are responsible for. Well, what does that mean? But as I've grown a little bit, and I'm sure I still have a long ways to go, but as I've grown, I kind of can just step back and see that I'm not this body. I'm not these actions. I'm not in control of all of this as much as I like to believe that I am, that there's higher forces at work. And the best I can do is try to put myself in harmony with those higher forces, with the forces that are going in the right direction, that are going, you know, towards God reminding activities and towards helping others and everything. But more than all that is just sit back and just kind of watch. That actually each one of us were something beyond all of these different actions. And it takes a certain kind of awareness to be able to just sit back and watch. And honestly, it's a little weird at first because we're so used to thinking that we are this physical body. And when we kind of sit back and watch and realize that it is kind of on autopilot and it just goes on its own, it's scary and weird, because we would think that if we don't take good charge of it, that it's going to just run off and crash. And that's the part where Swami said that it's an event that he's responsible for. So we are responsible and we can't let things just go off and crash. But at the same time, to pretend that that higher force isn't there is to live in darkness, ignorance, suffering, and pain. And I think we've all had enough suffering and pain, and we really want out of this. You know, something I've been contemplating lately, I'm not sure whether to bring it up because I don't know that I've fully contemplated it all the way through, but we'll try it here. Let's see. is that sometimes Swamiji or Master would say, oh, this person's suffering. It needn't have happened that way. That the person didn't need to suffer. And then other times you'll hear the great ones say, well, it's, predestined. This is his karma. This is just how it had to go. And often my either or mind will think, well, which is it? Did he have to suffer or did he not have to suffer? And just the other day, I kind of felt Master put a thought in my mind that, well, it's both. That if the man had more wisdom, which normally is born of experience, but also can be born of our attunement to the gurus, if the man had more wisdom, then he would be wise enough not to make these decisions, wise enough to overcome that karma, let's even say, talking about these greater forces, and then he would no longer have to suffer in that way. So on the one hand, that is a true statement. On the other hand, that if we have not yet learned those lessons, then we have to suffer and go through it and learn those lessons. And then we graduate and eventually we attain wisdom. And this is part of the ego's development. It's part of the blows of life that we receive over and over again until we realize that no matter what we do in this world, it's not really worth it. And there's only one thing that's worth it, and that's finding God. And so we learn to develop this ego to where we get to that point, where we no longer want to really be ourselves, where we no longer want to suffer, even in small ways anymore, and that we meet people who have learned to transcend suffering. We also learn that even with negative things do come, that since we're not this body, that we can rise above the reactions of this world of I like it or I don't like it. And then ultimately through that and through practicing Kriya Yoga, we can rise to the state that we're not even this body at all, that we're something so much, much more, that ultimately we are a state of consciousness. And, it's a nice thing to just be able to go through life knowing that whatever comes of itself, let it come, as Master said, it's all right. And that the one thing we can really be responsible for is our consciousness. And just maintaining that uplifted consciousness that is always receiving God's guidance and God's rays, you could say, God's rays of light and love and joy. So I'll hand this now over to Vineet.
Thank you, Jamal, for sharing. I'll also share a few things just uh, around this reading. One thing I just really enjoy, we usually do this reading in the monastery every morning whenever we meet. And this reading particularly had an amazing lightness to it, especially in the beginning with about the army generals and cowboy heroes. And it makes us think that, sometimes when we look around, the people who seem to be the most confident may not necessarily be the most self confident in many, many ways. It might just be an outer layer, or maybe at this point in their life they are fine, but there comes a blow, and when uncertainty comes, will those people whom we look at as being confident, will they still continue to be confident? Will they have faith in themselves? And that is what Swamiji is drawing our attention towards. He says it means confidence in the inner self and not in the ego, and which Jamal was talking about so beautifully, about how do we get rid of this ego or demolish the ego, which he didn't want to use, but still, I was just having a call this evening with someone who was actually making a very important spiritual decision in her life. It was a very big step spiritually. And she had many, many questions, like whether I should do this or do that. And you might think that, or I might think that she wasn't even confident. But this was the impact she had also, that, people around me are so confident and so self confident of what they are doing about. And here I am wanting to take such an important spiritual decision. And I'm not fully sure of what I'm getting into, but I'm sure of one thing, that I will do whatever it takes in order to get till the end. sometimes we imagine, especially when we see these superhero movies, that, self confidence is just like, I know this is how it is going to be. I know where is the next punch coming from so that I can defend myself, and I know where is the next attack coming from. Well, in this life of uncertainty, nobody can be that confident unless you are a saint. And I don't know, even if saints act in that way of knowing exactly what is happening, they know which direction to put energy, which direction to move forward. Or, I mean, I'm not a saint, so I can't speak much for them. But still, I don't think it is in terms of absolutes that life happens. It is more rather in the terms of direction. So when we talk of self-confidence, it's not about us knowing everything, but us having that inner certainty that I know where is the next step leading towards, and us having the inner certainty of where is my true faith coming from. This was one thing which I really enjoyed listening about stories of Swami Kriyananda ji. And especially many times he would come up, his life would challenge him with some deadlines of, doing this particular piece of music or writing this book. And he never said, oh, I can do this. It was usually from the point of view of, I can't do this, but God can do it through me, or my guru can do it through me. Recently, I was listening to a talk of his, and he was sharing that he wouldn't even sometimes know that what would be his next chapter in the book he was writing on about, or what would be the next page be about. He would just be in that divine flow. And you might say, and he had accomplished writing a lot of books and quite a few pieces of music. And as Jamal said, it is really about watching. And initially, like this friend of mine whom I was talking to, who was going to take an important spiritual decision, initially we have to start small. We can't assume that, yeah, it's going to happen and God will do it through me. We have to start from exactly where we are. So if right now if you were like me or you are like me, where I started, I liked having a checklist of everything I will be doing. It was never in terms of a flow that, okay, this is all can happen. And it was very detail oriented, like point number one, point number two, point number three, point number four. And I know what I am doing. But then guess what? Just one twist God sends into your path and everything goes for like a boom. And your well organized sheet for months, your Excel or your checklist or your to do list goes for a toss. I don't know how many times you've had your life tumble or crumble in that way. And I just look at my phone or my, sheet, and I'm like, what was I thinking that I can just plan everything, one after the other? And I have improved, I can say, over time, but still there is that temptation that, we need to have that complete control of what we are doing. But the kind of self confidence we are talking about is more in on a flow that I don't know, maybe, but I know the direction. I know where to look up for guidance. I know where to tune in to true guidance. There's a very funny story. I was once taking a major decision in my life, and someone very elder to me asked me, so you know what you're doing, right? I said, yeah, I know. I have a feeling of what I'm doing, right? And the first thing which kind of shocked him was, I have a feeling. I don't have a thinking of what I'm doing, but I have a feeling. He said, okay, fine. So what are you going to do after doing this, and this? And I said, I don't know. He said, what are you talking about? I said, no, I don't know. I don't know the specifics of where I'm going or what I'm wanting to do, but I know the direction. I can see the first few steps of what I'm going towards. And this was one of those places where I turned out to be not the checklist person who goes through things in an order, but rather tuning in. And I have found to my surprise that every time we tune in to higher guidance rather than knowing that I know, things turn out to be actually in a better way. Doesn't it sound ironic that the less control, it sounds in a way even stupid that the less control I have, the better things get. But yeah, well, it's just us kind of getting out of the picture and allowing the higher force. If you believe in God, allowing God. If you have a guru, allowing your guru to act through you, and then all those details can act out themselves. Now, does it mean that we don't do anything? This was one side of the spectrum, to be in a flow, and then the other side of the spectrum can be like, I don't even do anything. I let God do everything. And that I've seen go to another extreme where people can become absolutely lazy and absolutely irresponsible. I myself have had some of those moments that can we make this happen? Can we do this? Oh, it's fine. God will take care of it. Well, God will not take care of it if we don't act responsibly. There was once a time when Swami Kriyananda ji was scheduled to lecture in some place, and there was hardly, I think, one person or maybe two people who came for that lecture, and the people who were supposed to organize it just, with a complete attitude of non-attachment, said maybe that is what Divine Mother wanted to, and Swamiji wouldn't have any of it. Well, we have to put our energy. The spiritual path is not about, either or, like Jamal was saying. It's rather like, a marriage where we are trying to act, but at the same time allowing the higher force to act. It might seem like I don't know what I'm talking about. To some extent, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I have tried it from time to time, and trust me, it works. The more we kind of have this harmony that yes, I put out the energy, like I don't know, maybe in the previous affirmation satsang I mentioned, but Swami Kriyananda ji said about meeting luck halfway. So similarly, we put out the energy that this is the thing I'm confident about, but these are the things I don't know, these are the things uncertain in my life, but you offer it up, and then there comes a higher force, and there comes faith. So try little, try small, and you will find that little by little you can just let go of this ego sometimes we have too much reliance upon, and start trusting on the real self, which is the higher self, and gain our inspiration, our steps in life, and basically everything in our life. Like Swamiji said, as Jamal was mentioning, that we become an event for which we are responsible, and see it from a very macro view rather than getting into the details of life. With that, I would like to pass on to Jamal, who can lead us through the affirmation.
Thank you, Vineet. So here we go. We'll go through the affirmation now. And I'm going to read it again. I think it's a fine thing to do. Self-confidence, as it is normally understood, recalls to mind images of army generals and cowboy heroes, people, in short, who know their blacks from their whites. But life's alternatives are usually much more complex. Self-confidence on the spiritual path is of another order altogether. It means confidence in the inner self, not in the ego. It means living from within, living by truth rather than by opinions. It means living by what God wants, not by what man wants. Thus it means living by faith, in the sure knowledge that, although man is fallible, God is infallible. So now we'll do the affirmation together. Let's do it a few times out loud. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. One more time in a loud voice. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Now let's do in a normal voice. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, in a normal voice, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Now let's do in a whisper. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, in a whisper, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. One last time, in a whisper, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Now let's do this mentally, taking it deep into the subconscious mind. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, mentally, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Again, mentally, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. Let's again do it mentally, but this time we're going to take into the superconscious mind, at the point between the eyebrows. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. And the last time, I live in the assurance of God's truth within. In my inner self, and not in the opinions of others, lies true victory. And we'll close with Swamiji's prayer. What matter if people blame me? Of what importance is their applause? I live to please thee, Lord, confident that when thou art with me, I am protected, though it be from an enemy horde. Oh, live in that protection. It's been wonderful. Thank you.